Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council briefing of the 9th of November 2021 at 6 o'clock, and I declare the meeting open. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We don't have any apologies this evening. We have all council members accounted for or leaves of absence. So I will go directly to public question time and receiving of public statements and welcome you all to the meeting this evening. Most of you are very familiar faces, but for those who haven't been before and you wish to speak tonight, there's no set order. We just ask that you come up to the microphone, that you state your name and the suburb in which you reside, and we do time to 3 minutes. So I welcome you and call forward the first speaker.
Good evening, Mayor Cole, councillors and city staff. I'd like to make a brief comment regarding item 5.5 as both president of Florida Athena Football Club, as well as being a resident at 59 Sass Avenue, Mount Hawthorne. The club has, in collaboration with the city, been working on coming up with a plan
sorry, just for the record, Conpulius.
I did not say that, sorry.
No, that's I know who you are, but just for the records.
Sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead.
The club has, in collaboration with the city, been working on coming up with a plan to improve the space at Litter Stadium using the $3 million federal grant obtained by FAFC, which would be of great benefit to not only the club's players and members, but to the wider community. We're a club which has over 420 playing members, of which 300 are junior players, with 60% of the under 6s to under 12s residing in the city of Vincent. Many of the coaches and team managers are passionate mums and dads from Leederville, North Perth and Mount Hawthorne. Our girls program continues to grow year on year with approximately 50 girls playing up from 5 girls 3 years ago. Our ground has already been shortlisted as a training ground for the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023 tournament, and many of the staff at FIFA have put us in the top 3 venues in Perth once the change rooms and club room works are completed, which will put the city of Vincent in a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to promote ourselves on the world stage. There is data from other countries who have previously hosted, which will see another boost in participation of both boys and girls playing when the FIFA Women's World Cup comes to Australia in June 2023, hence the need for upgraded facilities. We have collaborations with many local user groups and are proud to have our club rooms used for regular meetings by both the Tools and Things Library, Transition Town Vincent, the WA Historical Cycling Club, and hosting the Transition Town Movie Nights. The club rooms are also used during the day by CEDA, who use it for sports education classrooms for year 11 and 12 students. We have traditional Greek taverna dinner nights open to all every Tuesday and Friday nights and host many other local fundraisers and events from other local groups and clubs. The club rooms are also available for hire for anyone wishing to have a gathering, meeting or party. Thanks to the city and a generous community grant, we're also planning a free family-friendly New Year's Eve party, which will take place on the stadium pitch, open to the whole community with details to be released shortly. In terms of the development plan, we're in agreement with many of the items displayed, but wish to note that when the detailed design happens down the track, that we hope that the consultation occurs with the main users of the facilities so that we can ensure win-win outcomes that do not impact on the operations of the club and other users of the facility. In particular, we have some issues around securing the facility and directing people through designated points on match days to enable us to comply with any COVID requirements, especially once the state opens up next year. We look forward to the projects commencing and can't wait for them to be ready to be used by all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Con. Next speaker, please.
Yeah, I'm speaking to the same point, 5.5. I'm Phil Brown of 20A Ellesmere Street, and I will speak to the issues. I will speak firstly as a representative of the Tools and Things Library and secondly as a Vincent resident. So under the first heading, Tools and Things Library, in the proposal document under financial budget implications, table 2, item 14 is repurpose turnstile building allowance $75,000. Are there any implications for the current tenants, Tools and Things Library? Point 2, under the proposed plan, vehicular access to the building doesn't appear possible. And point 3, would there be disruptions to normal operations of the tools and things library whilst development is in progress? I will now speak as a resident. And again, speaking to various items raised within the proposal, the perception that the football ground is the preserve of Florient Athena Football Club could be overcome with a notice to the effect that the public are welcome, which might be less expensive than removing part or all of the bund. This would leave the bund as a continuation of the topographical profile of the velodrome, which is of historical interest. And the wonderful grassy embankment would be available for kids to roll down or ride on or in cardboard boxes representing unstructured play. Lastly, and this is not flippant, but interesting, the map shown contained no cardinal compass points. And I'm just wondering if this is the current convention, because it made it difficult when reading the document to know which was the southeast corner, as the sun wasn't shining. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'm also a fan of the compass, so I do understand. Next speaker, please. No one else wishing to speak? Yep.
Hello, I'm Ashley LaFontaine from North Perth. In June, I submitted the Forestry traffic calming petition, which was supported by 120 signatories. I also spoke, along with 5 other residents of Forest Street, about our ongoing issues and concerns regarding the current lack of safety, amenity, and accessibility due to the excessive speed and volume of traffic on our street. The City of Vincent recorded over 12,500 motorists using our local residential street every week, and the main roads heat map shows an 85 percentile speed exceeding the 50 kilometers per hour speed limit. A couple of months ago, this council voted on the proposed traffic calming and parking changes to be installed subject to community consultation submissions being in favour of the respective proposals. The City of Vincent recently conducted this consultation, but we had concerns it was broad. We, the concerned residents and ratepayers of Forest Street, conducted our own accountable consultation between Fitzgerald Street and Norfolk Street only. For the record, 47 responses from 30 properties on the street show that 94% of us support the placement of 3 speed bumps between Fitzgerald Street and Norfolk Street. 96% support 1 or 2 hour parking restriction to be applied 7 days a week. 100% refused staggered parking because it is dangerous and confusing to residents. I await the outcome of the wider City of Vincent community consultation to gauge their reaction in comparison to the directly affected residents who live on Forest Street between Fitzgerald Street and Norfolk Street. We would appreciate a quick response to our request as the traffic intensifies towards Christmas and the narrow street gets clogged with parked shoppers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I'll just ask the Director for Infrastructure what the time frame is looking like.
Yes, Michael, the consultation closed on Friday, so we just putting the results together right now. So, I mean, if there's broad support as per the council decision, we'll be able to get those speed bumps in this side of Christmas. That won't be a problem.
Okay, so before Christmas, we're still aiming to complete works if the community support, which sounds like it is there.
Yeah, yes, Michael, that's correct. I've not seen the results yet, so don't want to prejudge them, but yeah, we could do it before Christmas if there's support. If not, then we bring it back to council, which would be in December.
All right, thank you very much, Director. Are there any further comments or questions this evening? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate your comments and feedback this evening. So we will come to those items and ask questions, particularly in relation to 5.5, the one item on the agenda tonight that's been raised. So before we do that, I'll just go over to the CEO for any declarations of interest received.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I received a declaration of interest from Councillor Loden affecting impartiality in relation to item 5.5, noting that one of Tools and Things Library Inc.'s organising committee members is a family member, and other members of the committee supported Councillor Loden's local government election campaign, and Councillor Loden plays indoor soccer with people who are members of the Florida Athena Club and executive. And Mayor Cole, I would like to declare an impartiality interest. My niece is one of the young girls that the club president referred to as playing with Florida Athena Football Club.
Thank you, Siri. I have previously made a declaration on this item as well that my son is a junior player with Florida Athena Football Club during the winter season. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. And also it was remiss of me not to note that we did receive some written questions on notice or responses and statements from Michelle Grundy, Peter and Suzette Herkenhoff, Sarah Ukich, James Bishop and Murray Slythe. So they have been forwarded to council members, and we assume that they have been read, and the protocol is that they are not then read out at the council briefing. So just for noting. Thank you. All right, so we have had item 5.5 raised by members of the public gallery. So we'll go to that item first, and a reminder to council members that this is a council briefing with the purpose being to ask questions of the reports to council, to seek further information and potentially to flag any amendments you might like to have prepared for the council meeting next Tuesday. So we're starting on item 5.5, which is the Britannia Northwest Reserve Development Plan. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Ipolo.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. I did have actually, this is carry on from what Phil Brown had mentioned. I have a couple of questions regarding the bund removal. Question one, what is the total cost saving if the bund removal does not occur? There is $150,000 for bulk earthworks, but please advise if there are other further costs in other line items. Question two, how strongly does the administration advocate for the bund removal on the grounds of opening up the stadium to the Greater Britannia Reserve? In my opinion, the perceived cost benefit.
Councillor Ipolo, it's not a time for opinion, it's just a time for questions.
Okay, sure. What I'd say then is that I'll take on notice, I'll liaise with the administration in relation to that question. Well, okay, I won't express my opinion, sorry.
You're more than welcome to do that next Tuesday night.
Okay. Question three, please confirm the external landscape architect cost disclosed on page 5 for $125,729 is based on a percentage fee of 10%, not 11%. And 4, please clarify the $262,920 cost item for furniture elements, and if possible, provide a breakdown of this amount. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can answer some of those. In regards to the money for the bund removal, yes, the cost is reflected there in the earthworks cost. In regards to administration's recommendation and why the bund removal is featured on the plan that you have before you for recommendation for approval is through the community consultation. Although we are noting there was some concerns with the bund removal, that's why you see the plan before you has changed from the plan that went out for community consultation, which actually had kind of, I suppose, those two elements that you see pushed through in the bund in the plan that we are recommending. The previous plan had that entire area earmarked for removal. Through community consultation, we spoke to people who were concerned about that from that seating perspective that had been brought up, as well as from the inability to retain trees. The reason that we have the plan in front of us is because a lot of people were really supportive of that bund removal to create that permeability and that visual connection from both spaces, from Litter Stadium as well as the club rooms at Florida Athena through to the car park wider Britannia Reserve and even Britannia Road. So we have created a balance to create that permeability, that visual connection, but not remove the entire bund, so that there are still elements where people can sit, and we're able to retain all mature trees in that area. Going on to some of the other questions, I can include the breakdown of the furniture costs within the briefing notes.
Thank you, councillors. Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question around the telecommunications tower and what we have in the report. Is there any proposal as part of this report for that to proceed in any way, or what is the update on that program?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, this is not a proposal to proceed with that. This just earmarks the two options that were discussed with the community through this process. I believe that the community consultation for that specific project will be done separately, and that will come to council separately.
Thank you. Do you have a timeline on when that's likely to happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, we do not at this stage.
Councillors. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just in relation to the body of the report that sets out the costings, I note that the costings currently are just related to those that are outside of the elements that are proposed to be delivered using the Australian federal grant. And I just wondered whether it would be possible to actually get a sort of, I guess, a full project cost, or at what stage that will be provided. And then also in relation to the costing around the landscape architect, that the statement sort of references, should an external landscape architect be required for detailed design? Just wondering in terms of what other options are being considered by the city, what additional costs, etc., and whether there's a recommendation as part of this to proceed down a particular path with that costing. And I just had a question in relation to the recommendation in terms of the, and if I've missed it in the notes, forgive me, we're just at this stage endorsing a plan, but just wondering in terms of the modification or proposal to schedule these works into other council financial plans, as whether when that's going to occur.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can definitely include in the report the additional information around the $3 million grant and what that would be attributed to. It would be the change rooms and the club rooms, but we can add those details into the report. In regards to the commentary around the landscape architect, that is noting that at the moment the city has a landscape architect internally, and that person is on a contract. If that person was still to be working for the city, that cost would not be applicable, because we would be able to be doing that work in-house. In regards to the third question, budget, when it comes, thank you very much. When this will come through the budgeting process, that will be, if this plan was to be approved, then we would be working with our finance team to see if and when that could be included in the long-term financial plan.
And I guess just in relation to the costings that we've got here, just in terms of what, I believe there was some reference to contingency, but just as to how these costs have been tested, and whether, I guess, at what point we might start to see some more, I guess, what assumptions have been made with these costs, what contingencies are included in these costs, and what's the process by which these costs get firmed up in terms of I guess, I don't know, quantity surveying or other items for probably this, and then the broader grant process as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose that's one of the positives of having an internal landscape architect at the moment. He has provided these costs, and with his expertise, we are able to provide a lot more, I suppose, detailed costs at this stage than what we ever would have been able to do previously in the past. In regards to the process moving forward for the federal government and the grant funding, what's required from the federal government is a concept level design of the works that will be carried out as part of that grant. So that's a concept plan for the change rooms itself, which is reflected on the development plan as number 1. So we have gone out to receive quotes to receive that level of a design, and they will also require that same level of detail of the cost that will be associated with that design, as well as letters from the city and the club that they are in agreements with those works.
And just in terms of some of the, I guess, concerns raised from the club in relation to ensuring that they're able to, I guess, operationalise any changes to the bund profile in terms of access and safety. Is the city able to provide any assistance or advice in terms of how that maybe is managed in other public parks and events, you know, on potentially like licensed or ticketed events, so that they can maybe gain a bit more surety that that's something that's able to be managed within the resources of a, you know, volunteer-based club?
Through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. We definitely heard from the club that that was something that needed to be worked through. So we will work through that with them throughout the process, noting that now that we are proposing for it to be those push-throughs through the bund rather than an entire expansive area being removed, we see that that being a lot less of a kind of burden on that volunteer base, as they could be based at those push throughs rather than an extremely large area, which would be very hard to kind of police and manage on game days. So that was another reason for that to be reflected in the plan.
Thank you, that's all.
Councillors, Councillor Loden.
Just a query on the change to the bund between what was in the briefing notes and what was then circulated separately as a separate attachment. So you talked about a change to the profile of the bund, and this is not topographical, so it looks kind of the same between the two. If you could just explain how that looks differently to help the people in the gallery as well.
Through you, Mayor Cole, apologies. What I was referring to was the plan that came before advertising versus the plan that is before us now. So the plan that went out for advertising had, I suppose, between your number 2 and your number 16 within the plan that is before us now, that entire area removed, whereas now we just have those simple areas removed at this stage. The difference between the plan that was uploaded on the city's website originally to what is now just pertains to some formatting with the legend.
And then in terms of the issue for the tools and things library in terms of access, because obviously that's now changed to a passive recreation and barbecue area. Is there a way to address the concerns around access?
Through you, Mayor Cole, absolutely. Through the detailed design, we would see that there would definitely be vehicle access to that building. So that would be related.
And in terms of process from here, this is for the purpose of receiving the grant funding, but there'll be likely changes, and will there be further engagement with the community around this, or is this just a case of once the funding comes in, there'll be detailed design and then execution?
Through you, Mayor Cole, on the elements that relate to the grant itself, that design will come before council before we submit it to the federal government, and that takes into consideration the community consultation that has been done now on that, as that we see that being quite a process that is in the short term. We're comfortable with the fact that the community consultation has just been carried out, so that will reflect the sentiments of the community. The remaining aspects of the development plan will be carried out in a staged approach depending on funding.
Councillors, Councillor Pillay.
So I just want to clarify that what's being proposed or recommended here is the 1.2 million spend. The 3 million grant is something totally separate that is subject to a federal approval process and is not included in these numbers. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's correct. There is a federal grant through the Communities Infrastructure Fund, which was promised, but is an interesting fund in that you actually have to then provide a business case after the promise has been made. This was arranged directly through Florida Athena Football Club, and the pledge was made directly to the club. And the $3 million has not yet been secured. This is why we're doing all of this planning to actually provide the business case to the federal government to secure that funding that has been pledged. And the 1.2 million would be City of Vincent funded or sought from another additional source. Any further response on that, directors? No, okay. Yes, Councillor Alexander.
Just a question on the public art. I note it's 10%, and constructions I've been involved in have generally been 1 or 2%. I've never seen 10%. Can you ask how that was arrived at?
Through you, Michael, yes, that was due to the fact that through the community consultation, it was quite a big theme that people wanted to see art incorporated into this plan.
Yeah, but the normal amount for art is 1% or 2%. This is $72,000 and 10%. I've never seen anything even halfway close to that. It must be a different policy. I don't know.
Do you think that would help to provide some feedback around the percent for art policy and how that applies to private development?
Through you, Michael, we can provide that in the briefing notes, yes.
Not to be high maintenance to the in-house landscape architect, but perhaps could be helpful if we could have an elevation that would show the bund, the removal of that section of the bund, and if you're coming into the development, the levels, because I think that when you're coming in, I'm still trying to understand at point 10 where you have the passive recreation and barbecue area outside the tools and things library. I'm just really interested in understanding the levels and how that will present as you're sort of approaching. Would that be difficult to prepare in a week, even if it was a bit of a rough sketch?
To you, Michael, I'm sure a rough sketch or somewhere along those lines would be absolutely fine. Just to clarify, were you wanting the view from that number 10 or as you kind of approach on number 18 from the car park?
Well, I'm interested in the distance in the area that's being created by removal of the bund. So if we're sort of responding to Florida Athena's interest in how to secure that for game days and manage with COVID safe events, etc., what's the distance? And when you're approaching, because I think I've only seen a vision of what it looks like with the former change room option in the bund, which was quite expansive and showed that green space area and the view out to the car park. So it's really about trying to understand the extent of the bund opening and the levels once you actually come into 2 Litre Stadium and how that relates back to the sort of car park and the ground level. Yep, is that okay?
To you, Michael, yes.
Okay, thank you. And I don't think that we've answered the question from Phil of the Tools and Things Library about the refurbishment, the purpose of the refurbishment, and whether that is going to disrupt in any way the Tools and Things Library.
To you, Michael, obviously, it's been very successful having the Tools and Things Library in there. So if we were to look at repurposing, and it's just the potential to repurpose that building, I'm sure that we would also be really endeavouring to find an alternative home in the interim if it did impact any of the operations of the library.
Well, in that case, could we just get a bit more information about the $75,000 and what works are proposed to the building so we can get an idea of what repurposing looks like? It doesn't sound like a large budget.
To you, Michael, yes, we'll provide that in the briefing notes.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps a conversation with Tools and Things Library to explain that as well would be very helpful. And also just in relation to follow up on the questions that Councillor Gontaszewski was asking about the costings. Just wanted to clarify whether the costings for the change rooms and the upgrades to the club rooms include contingency and project management.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, when we go through and do the plan and the costings and present that to council, we will ensure that that includes the full cost.
Thank you. And in relation to the question asked by Councillor Castle, about the telecommunications towers, my understanding is that both still appear in the plan as potential because that process has not finalised. Is that correct?
To you, Mayor Cole, that's correct.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Iplo.
Sorry, I just want to clarify the question I was trying to ask earlier before I tripped myself up. I guess the question is again about the bund removal. So my question really to the administration is, how critical do you think that aspect of this project, how critical is that, the removal of the bund? Do you think it's critical to this project? Because I read the reasons for its retention on page 3, paragraph 3 under bund removal, and I thought it was quite compelling, those reasons. And when I looked at the community engagement, it didn't look definitive in terms of having it to be removed. So would the administration consider that that the bund stay and that this project could still proceed for all intents and purposes of what it was designed to achieve?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think you're absolutely right. The community consultation is not definitive. There's comments for and against, but noting that there is definitely commentary for, and given administration's kind of expertise and experience in the site and sites like this, in order to achieve the objective of that permeability and the connection between the two spaces, in order to achieve that connection, the bund is crucial to achieving that specific objective for the plan. For the project overall, it would obviously achieve many other things from other elements, but that removal of the bund is a large aspect, and taking that away would change the outcome quite significantly.
So in your opinion, if we didn't remove the bund, this project shouldn't proceed? Just to clarify.
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, in my opinion, it should still proceed, but the outcome would be vastly different because you would not create that connection.
Councillors, any further questions on this item? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. We'll move then to go through the remaining items sequentially. So that takes us to item 5.1, 110 Coogee Street, Mount Hawthorne, proposed 3 group dwellings. This is an amendment to an existing approval. Any questions? No questions? Oh, Councillor Castle.
Sorry, Mayor Cole, I was just getting my notes up. Sorry, all the way back.
No questions. Okay, we'll go to item 5.2, number 17 St Albans Avenue, Highgate, proposed alterations and additions to a single house. Questions on this item? Councillor Gontaszewski.
I'm still just reading through the questions that we were provided prior to the meeting, the public questions and statements. So I think there might be some questions out of that. But to start with, just in relation to the fencing element of the proposal, can you just talk me through the city's rationale for supporting the fencing that is not aligned with the character retention guidelines, and the fences that are listed as not being compliant on the street? I'm interested in getting an assessment as to, in relation to fencing, has this, which of the fences that are non-compliant have been approved since the character retention guidelines were adopted? like what's the city's track record and consistency with the fencing provisions and the guidelines?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the city's rationale for supporting the front fence proposal, the guidelines for the area set out that the front fences are to be 1.2 metres in height. In terms of its form, the proponent is seeking a fence from 1.1 metres up to 1.8 metres. So there's something there existing. So that is the departure in terms of the maximum fence height. In terms of the rationale as to why it is being supported, ultimately height is one component, but also its form in terms of colours and materials. Now that was tested by referring the proposal through to the city's design review panel member as well for some input. But in terms of the height itself, they are limited to 4 piers that extend to the 1.8 metres. The remainder of that fence would be visually permeable above 0.7 metres in height. So on balance, in terms of that appearance, it was considered acceptable. In terms of your question around the other properties listed in the officer's report that have height departures to the guidelines, I will take that on notice and confirm those dates of when they were approved. The purpose of inclusion of that commentary in the report around the existing streetscape is because that is a relevant consideration around compatibility with the streetscape setting. And there are other examples of 1.8 metre high fencing.
Councillors, Councillor Hallett.
Just in terms of the questions that were sent through by the public, will we get answers to those in the briefing notes, some of those, rather than us asking them here?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, happy to provide them in the briefing notes.
Can I just pick up on that? I think it's probably useful to answer them in case the residents are listening to the briefing. Some of the issues, Manager, go to the issues of visual privacy, particularly from the from the rooftop terrace, stating that they don't believe that the terrace is adequately screened at 1.6 metres. I think if you could just address the R code provisions around that, and also the R code provisions around non-habitable rooms.
Sure.
Thank you.
To you, Mayor Cole. Yes, there were concerns primarily with the rooftop terrace and the visual privacy implications of that. Ultimately, through the assessment of the application, there has been support from the applicant to extend visual privacy screening to that adjoining property. Now, the visual privacy standards under the R codes, which is the control for residential development, sets out that a screen height of 1.6 metres is adequate to satisfy visual privacy concerns. Now, that 1.6 metre high screening needs to be permanent, needs to be visually impermeable for 75%. So there's details around that, and that's all set out in the R codes, and that is secured through a condition of administration's recommendation. In addition, there's another condition that says that for the entirety of that balcony or rooftop terrace, it needs to be screened to a height of 1.6 metres. Now, that might be where the concern arises, because on the plan it is actually not shown for the entirety of that boundary, but there is a condition that refers to that being extended. I hope that clarifies that point. In terms of the other visual privacy concern, it relates to a upper floor bedroom. I believe it is bedroom number 3. And it has a window which faces or is orientated towards St. Albans, the street proper. There were concerns raised that it would result in visual privacy concerns to the adjoining property. Now, that window itself, following consultation and appreciating the concerns from the adjoining landowner, the applicant has reduced the size of that window. So that is no longer considered or defined as a major opening for the purposes of an R-codes assessment. So it's reduced down to a certain size threshold. Therefore, it no longer presents a visual privacy concern for the purposes of the R-codes assessment. Now, its orientation is still towards the street. It's at 90 degrees to the adjoining property. So any such overlooking would be oblique. And also, we don't have any images provided from the applicant, but it would also fall to the roof of the adjoining property. So those were the concerns that was raised during the advertising period, and that was the response provided from the applicant.
Thank you, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I have a couple of questions. Firstly, would it be possible to get a copy of the St Albans guidelines? I don't believe they've been provided, so that we can see what it's being measured against. And secondly, can you confirm, is this coming to council for determination as a result of the number of objections or because of the character retention area, or both?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can provide a link perhaps through the briefing notes to the St Albans guidelines. And it's coming to council because it received more than 5 objections.
So the fact that it is covered by character retention area guidelines doesn't automatically bring it to council, that's correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's my understanding, but I will confirm in the briefing notes as well for you.
Thanks.
Through Mayor Cole, just add, one of the requirements though is that we advertise to the entire character retention area. So there isn't a requirement for them to come to council, but it's offset by the fact that the entire area is consulted with, and if there's more than 5 objections, it does come. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can you also confirm that the roof terrace is not considered a 3rd story?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I can confirm that it's not defined as a story. A story is defined in R-Codes Volume 2, the apartment guidelines, and basically it sets out exceptions, which includes stairways, spaces contained within stairways. That aside, it's still, in terms of that building and the height associated with that, that is covered off in the city's or the officer's assessment for building height. So it's not that it hasn't had or been considered in terms of appropriateness of that scale of development. It is just technically not considered a story for the purposes of assessment.
Thank you. Can you also explain the setback in the areas where there are the angled window seat wall meets the or presents to the boundary?
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. This is it's a technicality again with the R-Codes, but ultimately there are separate provisions in the R-Codes that deal with, number 1, buildings on the boundary walls, and they are defined in the R-Codes as being nil on the boundary to within 0.6 meters. Okay, so anything within there, there's a set of provisions around the amount of buildings to the boundary. But then there's secondly, separate provisions around buildings set back from the boundary. Okay, so what we have here on the ground floor to the rear of the site on the southeastern boundary is an angled wall which relates to a window seat, and that basically extends from a boundary wall, so a portion of the building is actually on the boundary, to 1.5 meters setback. Both of those portions comply with the deemed to comply standards in the R-Codes. However, that portion that transitions angles is caught between 0.6 meters to the prescribed 1.5 meters, and technically that is a boundary wall departure. Now, that's been considered against the design principles, but ultimately, if that was completely on the boundary, that would satisfy the deemed to comply standards. It's just a technicality around the transition of that wall.
Thank you. It's an unusual design that we don't see very often. So just trying to get my head around that. Can I ask in relation to the rooftop terrace, is that part of, does that contribute to the open space calculations and also to the landscaping requirements? And how much percentage are we relying on the rooftop terrace for both of those elements compared to the outdoor area on the ground floor? Happy for you to take that on notice if you're looking for, I'm just interested in how much the rooftop terrace contributes to that.
Through you, Mayor Cole, it does not contribute to open space. Open space is specifically defined as well under the R codes. And in terms of landscaping, it would contribute planting area, which is a requirement under the city's built form policy. And in the landscaping section of the report, it sets out that the planting areas exceed that set under the built form policy deemed to comply standards. So 3% of the site is required to be planting areas, and the proposal provides 5.1% of planting areas. I can do a breakdown in the briefing notes perhaps of how much that contributes towards that planting area.
Thank you. Final question. You mentioned before about screening, and it appears that some of the screening requirements will be met through the planter box plantings. And I'm just wondering how that is implemented, because there will be delay in maturity of trees or plantings, and how do we enforce that that screening is actually in place if it's happens through greenery?
Through you, Mayor Cole, in terms of the rooftop terrace area, so to the northwestern side and then also to the southeastern side, both of those side boundaries, maybe I'll speak to each of those. To the northwestern side, you'll see that there's a planter box. There is no screening aside from that or affixed to that. That is because when you install that planter box on that rooftop area, you will satisfy the separation distances for visual privacy to the properties across the right of way to the northwest with the installation of that planter box. So that has been secured through a condition of planning approval. To the southeast, that is shown to have a privacy screen of 1.65 meters in height. As I referred to previously, that also needs to be extended for the entirety of that rooftop terrace, like boundary length.
Okay, so given that the width of the planter boxes will set the vision back, then there's no requirement for screening in that area. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's correct, to the northwestern side.
Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Through you to the manager. Councillor Castle already kind of asked the question that I had around what constitutes a story, but I just had another wrinkle to it really. Like I take the point that you made around stairwells not being included, but from the plans that I can see, the terrace includes bench top and sink, which I guess could be described as rudimentary cooking facilities. Does that constitute part of a story?
Through you, Mayor Cole, perhaps through the briefing notes, I can include the definition of story. It is quite lengthy and there's exclusions, but ultimately story, one of the qualifiers is also being contained and roofed and such. So I guess there's the definition to work through, so I can provide that through the briefing notes.
Great, thank you.
Manager, follow up to that one. We are beginning to see more rooftop terraces emerge, particularly in two-storey areas, and that sometimes does lead to some angst from neighbours. Could you perhaps in the briefing notes just outline any anything within our local planning policy that deals with rooftop terraces, or if perhaps this is something that we might need to address and discuss further in relation to how these are emerging.
Yes, Mayor Cole, I can provide that in the briefing notes. Ultimately, unenclosed active outdoor spaces that are elevated above the ground level is accounted for or referenced in policy framework. I agree that in our inner city setting, it's I think quite a clever design response when you've got not a lot of lot area to play with. So I appreciate why they are why we're seeing more of these. But there are provisions in the policy framework, and I'm happy to provide those to you through the briefing notes.
That'd be great, thank you. Also, I just wanted to ask about the St Albans policy and how that relates to the visual of the second story at the rear. Just noting that with the stairwell skillion roof, it is a striking feature. And it does appear from the elevations to be very visual from the front of the house. And I'm just wondering whether that skillion roof does need to be that high for clearance, or whether that is more of a design feature.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll take that on notice in terms of its height. Ultimately, it needs to provide adequate clearance for the stairwell. However, that is inherently tied into the other floor levels. So I can get some feedback from the applicant in terms of why it needs to be that high.
Thank you, that would be appreciated. And just in relation to the text in the front of the report talks about the modifications to the front house and doesn't reference the change to the roof pitch, which does seem to be a good outcome.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, that is annotated on the plans, but not captured in the report.
Okay,
body. We can
thanks.
update that.
And just the comments from the neighbours, there is a bit of upset about the notification of the amended plans. Could you just talk to that? Thank you.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole. Ultimately, through the consultation period, departures were proposed to the planning framework. Those were advertised, and subsequent to that, the applicant made some changes, the finalisation of the assessment through the city's offices for tabling at council. Administration is still of the view that it was useful to relay that back to the applicant to notify them that changes had been made to address their comments, but also to address the city's offices assessment, as well as the DRP members' feedback. No greater departure to the planning framework or deemed comply standards in the planning framework were being proposed as part of that. It wasn't significant alterations of the proposal. So on that basis, it wasn't formally re-advertised. So prior to tonight, we sent out a tailored notification to previous submitters, just letting them know that they can have a look at the agenda and see the extent of those changes. It was more just to inform them. It wasn't inviting formal feedback on the extent of the changes.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps we could just let those residents know that they're more than welcome to come to the council meeting next Tuesday, and they still have a week to raise issues. That was all from me. Are there any further questions on this one? Okay, we shall move to item 5.3, which is 17 to 19 Brisbane Street, Perth, proposed alterations and additions to service station. Questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor to Manager still. I've got a few, and so feel free to take some on notice, but it might be quicker for some of them for you to respond to straight away. There wasn't a condition requiring an ESD report. Are you able to just explain a bit more about the rationale as to why it was felt that the applicant didn't need to require one?
Sorry, through you, Mayor Cole. I know you mentioned it would be quicker to respond to it, but it's obviously taking a long time to find it in my in the report body. There was commentary included in the report, and sorry, on page 110 of the agenda. And the explanation is included in there. Ultimately, administration was satisfied that the applicant had demonstrated that those principles had been embedded in the design. It's challenging with alterations and additions. A judgment call needs to be made in terms of what is the threshold that requires an applicant to submit a full ESD report. They had provided an explanation as to how they thought, the applicant that is, how they thought they met the principles of environmentally sustainable design. Probably the key benefit from a sustainable perspective is the adaptive reuse of that building existing on site. And that goes some way, as well as long as other measures set out in the report, to achieving those principles.
I guess just as a follow-up, does the absence of having that report, what's the process for administration to then make that assessment without a report, and does that actually require more work for us?
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's no further assessment required because the energy efficiencies have been set out and they've been incorporated in the building design, and they're secured through the development plans itself. So by virtue of delivering on what is proposed, they would be embedding all of those energy efficiencies.
Just wondering about what mechanisms exist to support transition to electric vehicles, and essentially the same way that we think about multi-storey car parks, and we might want specific requirements of heights and things so they can be retrofitted to be inhabitable floors. Is there anything that we can look at, and too late for this, but for easily facilitating future retrofits of service stations to switch to a different type of fuel?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's a very good question. I will take that on notice and liaise with my colleagues to provide you with a response. It might actually be a broader policy consideration, even though it's in the context of what's before you now.
And the site's currently undergoing remediation due to contamination. Obviously, that's not the topic of this decision, but it's in the frame of the people that are living nearby. What opportunities exist to prevent future leakages? The report refers to the dangerous goods regulations. Are you able to give a lay description of the requirements for any concerned residents that might live nearby?
Through you, Mayor Cole, ultimately, there's a department that is responsible for monitoring and regulating fuel sale and storage on site. So in terms of those, there is a regulation with a supporting code which specifies all of those details and standards that need to be met. This application was referred to that department, being Department of Mines, and they provided quite a comprehensive list of advice notes. So that basically sets out how the development is to occur to ensure that those types of fuel tanks and installation of such facilities are done in strict accordance with those standards. Now, ultimately, that's probably the best advice I can give to residents nearby, to say that there are standards and that need to be satisfied, and they also need to be carried out by qualified and experienced specialists in that field.
Thank you. In the original application with the larger signage, there were some renderings that assisted with getting a sense of the signage scale and impact. There doesn't appear to be similar ones in the revised plans. Is there any chance these can be requested and inclusive of the projected landscaping?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, we can request that from the applicant. Just a disclaimer, it depends on how much time to prepare new renders to reflect the trees, but we would be able to absolutely get something, just not sure if it will cover all of those things.
And just lastly, do we have a sense of the opening hours of other service stations in Vincent?
Through Mayor Cole, I can include those in the briefing notes.
Okay, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify, to answer a question that was raised in the emailed public question time, and just confirming that there is an existing approval from 1986 for the operation of a service station with unlimited hours, so that is not before us or we're not able to vary that approval.
Through Mayor Cole, there was an approval issued in 1986 for a service station with a certain configuration. That approval did not restrict operating hours, so that could, in that configuration, that service station could have operated with unlimited operating hours, 24/7. What's before you is modifications to a service station. So council needs to form a view around the appropriateness of the extent of these changes, okay? Primarily works, they're making certain things bigger, replacing the canopy over the fuel houses and a larger retail like store format, removing the mechanical workshop. That is what needs to be considered in terms of its appropriateness in this setting.
So does that mean there is an opportunity to put limits on hours under this application?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, there is, because you would need to consider the appropriateness of this intensity and how it would function, and operating hours would perhaps be one of those measures that could address any potential offsite impacts.
But in order to justify that, we would need to demonstrate that an increased impact, amenity impact, given the changes that are being requested.
Through Mayor Cole, in short, yes, we've stepped through, or administration has stepped through some of these key considerations, traffic, noise, through the report, and ultimately you need to consider all of those considerations and make a decision on balance whether what is being sought is appropriate in this location.
And has that been discussed with the applicant at all, or are they all or nothing?
Do you, Mayor Cole, to clarify, do you mean all or nothing in terms of operating hours? To you, Mayor Cole, that hasn't come up, or we haven't asked the question because we've assessed what's before us as we're required to do. Now, if that's something that is potentially an issue for council and decision making, that could be raised as a separate conversation with the applicant, but no, administration has not raised that.
Okay, thank you. In relation to the deep soil and canopy tree canopy requirements, our built form policy, does it contemplate users like a service station, which are obviously quite different to other retail and commercial outlets?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, it doesn't. Our built form policy has different volumes that targets residential and commercial and such. So it's a little bit more broader than land use specific.
And has there been discussion with the applicant about the ability to increase the plantings on the perimeter of the area where that may not impact the use of the site?
Through Mayor Cole, there hasn't been discussion to increase it more than what's before you. There was that through the assessment process. That was one of the comments back from our DRP member as well. And so the applicant proposed a greater amount of landscaping and a landscaping strip to the street front. Ultimately, the nature of the land use is challenging, and I completely agree that the built form policy probably doesn't speak neatly to a service station because it's primarily vehicle based. And so all the maneuvering, all of the access, the car parking, areas for fuel bowser, it really does limit opportunities on site, particularly when you're dealing with an existing building that can limit the opportunity. So from the officer's perspective, in exhausting that, we were satisfied that landscaping was appropriate for what was being proposed.
So in the officer's recommendation, basically you're satisfying that this is a maximum amount of landscaping that can be accommodated?
To you, Mayor Cole, or through you, Mayor Cole, sorry. Yes, could you install perhaps some shade trees for the car bays located to the west, potentially? Because that is a standard in our built form policy, 1 shade tree per 4 car parking bays. So you could have like island there. So that might be an opportunity, but for the most part, I feel like administration has exhausted that.
Okay, possibly flag that that could be included in the landscaping plan for next week. But I'll take your advice on that. Also have a question about delivery hours, which is limited to 7 to 7 Monday to Saturday. Does that include the hours that a fuel tanker can attend to for refueling?
Through you, Mayor Cole. I'll confirm that in the briefing notes. I know that it was specifically set out in the noise report and also covered off in the traffic impact assessment when deliveries should and shouldn't occur, particularly for the fuel tankers. So I'll confirm that separately.
Thank you. And just lastly, in relation to the signage, how does the height of the monolith compare with the surrounding buildings? How visible is it from a distance? In just sort of trying to get a sense of how it sits in context. It might be covered by the renderings that Councillor Hallett referred to.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I agree. It would absolutely is covered off in the renderings. It's actually included in the superseded advertised plans in the agenda tonight, but I'll pull them out separately, update those and include them as an attachment for next week's meeting.
Thank you. I guess I'm trying to get a sense of how it sits in context with surrounding buildings. So not just that site on its own, but where it might be visible from outside of the precinct or on approach.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, understood. I just want to clarify that sign in terms of a 6 metre height, that's consistent with the city signage policies prescribed standards.
I'll go to Councillor Wallace first, because I saw you had your hand up before. So come back to you then, Councillor Hallett.
Thanks, Mayor Cole. Through you to the manager, just wanted to revisit the opening hours again. So any restriction that we would place on opening hours would have to be based on an assessment of an amenity impact because of the pre-existing land use. I guess my question there is, like the land use is the same in that it's service station, but since the original approval was given, our definition of service station has changed and that's kind of being relied upon. So I guess what, in my opinion, well, sorry, I'm not giving an opinion to be very clear. I'm wondering.
My question is.
My question is why why they're allowed to rely on the updated definition and not the original definition, because I presume there's not a lot of demand for motor oil at 3 a.m. and they'll be selling other items that weren't really identified as part of the original definition or the original approval.
Through you, Mayor Cole, page 106 of your agenda sets out the definition under the City of Perth's scheme at that time. Ultimately, the approval that was issued included a retail or store component, okay? Albeit at a much smaller scale, but it was approved as part of that. So what is before you is an alteration or a change to the configuration of what's on site. Aside from the removal of the workshop, the retail shop component still remains, the fuel bowsers remain, and ultimately this is still an integrated service station. So it's just that floor areas of each of the components are changing, okay? So on that basis, I don't believe they are relying on the city's current planning scheme in terms of the definition. What they are doing is seeking to modify what was previously approved. Now, that's, I suppose, where the consideration needs to come in terms of, well, is the extent of the changes, because it will function differently, will that be appropriate in this location, given its context? It's permitted to be a 4-story, its own mixed use site. So that's quite significant in terms of intensity. And so is the surrounding area. It's opposite Perth Oval or HBF Park. That attracts its own visitors and functions. So I suppose in that context, is 24 hours reasonable in this location? That is what you need to work through in terms of, you're right, the off-site amenity impacts, and that's the purpose of the report, and we step through some of those considerations.
Oh, can I get one more in? Sure. Thank you, Michael. Just around landscaping again as well, it was noted that one of the constraints or one of the reasons why we're at 25% of the required amount of landscaping was, I guess, vehicle access and movements. Were any plans provided that showed vehicle entry and exit and maneuverability within the site, or are we just kind of taking their word on it?
Through you, Mayor Cole, what was provided is contained in the attachment for the transport impact assessment, and that ultimately shows manoeuvring for fuel tankers and service vehicles and such. So this has been designed to account for that. It is also the same, essentially the same access arrangements and movements through the site as what was previously approved. Specifically, those access points remain.
Yeah, I guess like minimum clearance distances and stuff like that wasn't shown on that plan. So, you know, like how the vehicles would move through it, that was displayed, but in terms of what the minimum requirements were and how far this was potentially above that, I think that would be useful information to determine whether we are or they are in fact constrained on this site. And I guess I'd also ask the question about whether admin would consider, I guess, going back and suggesting 1 or 2 of the car bays may be removed to meet landscaping requirements, given that there's no minimum number of car bays required for this development, as a question.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can raise that with the applicant and have that in the briefing notes for you to have on hand for your decision next week.
Manager, just in relation to the hours in the original approval, was the approval silent on the hours, or was it clearly stated that they were unlimited hours?
To you, Mayor Cole, silent. There were no conditions relating to it.
Okay, and I haven't really dealt with this before in planning. So where you've actually got an operation over a number of years that has established a sort of practice of hours, does that have any bearing in relation to hours, or is silent meaning that would that just be taken to be unlimited without any question?
To you, Mayor Cole, it would be taken as there is no restriction based on the terms of that approval.
So it wouldn't be arguable that custom and practice has been established by the practice of the existing petrol station over a period of 20 years, for example?
To you, Mayor Cole, no. That would, in terms of how it's been functioning previously, it would give an indication in terms of if there's any potential issues with it. But no, it wouldn't hold any weight per se if a new operator, for example, wanted to come along and operate at different hours.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. In relation to the expansion of the convenience store, it's probably in the report somewhere. I apologise. You'll have read it, but it's very, very long. What's the floor area percentage of the entire floor area, and is it actually an ancillary use? Is it in terms of the floor space? My understanding of an ancillary use, if you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it should be not the dominant use, and that is usually determined by floor space. Happy for you to take that on notice if that speeds things up. And lastly, can I just flag an amendment that the signage for the proposed development is in compliance with the city's signage policy?
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to clarify, all signage.
Yes. Any further questions? Councillor Loden?
Just recognising the deficit of trees on the site. What's the potential for additional trees in the verge on the northern and eastern side of the property?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll liaise with my colleagues and provide that in the briefing notes.
As part of that, can also advise the potential there is 2 car bays on the street on the eastern side, and there's what appears to be a large area of tarmac that is sort of crosshatched and so not utilised, and whether that area could be planted with a number of trees and landscaped in some way as an additional offset. And I realise there's challenges around sightlines and proximity to the corner there as well. And I'll foreshadow that a request for an amendment to add those additional trees into the verge, and just noting that I'm actually going to be away next week, so I'll have to rely on someone else to move it.
Just a quick one, because it'll be for the briefing notes. In relation to the signage, I'm just wondering about the impact on of the amount of light coming from signage in combination with the street lighting that's in the area for the apartments that are across the road on Brisbane Street, and whether there's limits to the amount of lumens or something that we would require of signage, or whether it's measured independently or the entire context together.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, there are standards. There's an Australian standard around outdoor lighting, and that would apply as well. There is commentary in the officer report around its brightness, and that's based on the Australian standards. It's also included as one of the conditions around ensuring that it doesn't exceed that specified standard.
Is everyone satisfied? Okay, we can move on. Thank you very much, Manager. Appreciate that. Next item is 5.4, Place Plan Minor Annual Review. Any questions on this item? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, through the Mayor to the Manager. Just in relation to the Woodville Master Plan, it's being amended to a landscape plan for the northwest corner, which Council has endorsed. Does that mean a master plan for the entire reserve has been superseded, or will that appear now as a separate item for future years?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that won't feature in this place plan for future years, as this is just the 4 years. Although it is a future plan that we intend to do, it will not be within the life of this place plan.
Anything further? No? Questions on place plans? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a number of items that are registered as discontinue. Example of that would be Wi-Fi in the Mount Hawthorne Town Centre, banner poles in Axford Park in the Mount Hawthorne Place Plan. Can I just get a clarification of, does discontinue mean it's a dead project, or it is just being pushed out beyond the life of these place plans?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's depending on which item, it can mean both. The reasoning for some of the items being discontinued is lack of funding. That does not mean that there would not be funding in future years, and therefore it could be featured in a future place plan. Whereas there may be some examples where it does not kind of happen. We discontinue it and it won't come up again. I suppose an example of that one would be 3.1 in the North Perth, encourage North Perth Plaza site improvements. At this stage, we wouldn't see that being a plan until we had achieved other actions on that site. So it would depend on the action that we were referring to, whether it was going to be in future place plans or whether it would be discontinued and not feature in future place plans, noting that those that would not feature in future place plans, it would mostly be because it would be replaced with an action that would be amended or different to the action that you see there, rather than just completely not looking at, say, for example, the North Perth Plaza site itself.
Okay, thank you. I suppose then my question is discontinue always the correct wording, because it does imply that it's never coming back again. And maybe that will vary depending on the project that it refers to. There was another piece of wording in relation to the Wi-Fi in Mount Hawthorne Town Centre that just said not supported in budget. So same question, is that still a live project but has been delayed to a future place plan, or is it never going to happen?
Through you, Mayor Cole, at this stage, it will not feature in a future place plan until there is budget. I suppose we are trying to ensure that what is reflected here is budgeted for, and that is continued from now into the future. So until the budgeting process confirmed that action, we would not reflect it in a place plan. So I suppose that process would have to come first until it was a live project. And at this stage, we don't see that being a project included in the budget.
So how do we ensure that these projects that for various reasons have not been funded in the life of the place plan don't get lost when the next place plan is prepared?
Through you, Mayor Cole, they would definitely, a review of the previous place plans would definitely be a major part of us developing the next place plans, as well as obviously community consultation. So we would be doing community consultation on the actions that we delivered, that we didn't deliver, the reasonings for that, and making sure that they are still relevant within the community, noting that that would be a 4-year process. So if the community was still interested and there was still reason to do those actions, they could be included in future place plans. But if the community sentiment had changed, then we wouldn't include them in the future place plan. So I suppose more answering your question is that a review of the previous iterations of the place plan throughout every single minor review would be part of the process of developing the new place plan at that major review through that process.
Okay, I suppose given that most of these place plans are still in their first version or second, perhaps there's an opportunity to review how we approach projects that might belong in a place plan but are not budgeted for within the 4-year cycle, and how we capture those longer term projects and plan for them. That's just an aside question. Finally, I'm just wondering where's the appropriate place for a review of street parking in Mount Hawthorne, because we do have an item around parking review, which is in relation to car parks. And my recollection is that we have a review of street parking in Mount Hawthorne coming up. We've done one in North Perth. Does that live in the place plan, or is that not? Is that something that we are capturing somewhere else?
Through you, Mayor Cole, on your previous question regarding how you plan for those projects in the future, that would be through the long-term financial plan, as that goes through far more years than the place plan does. So once a project is embedded in that plan, we would make sure that it is then reflected in the place plan, rather than the place plan it being reflected in the place plan and then the long-term financial plan. I suppose that's the process that we're trying to go through now. And in regards to the question on parking, yes, the place plan is the place where anything in the town centre, it should be captured.
Well, I'll just ask a question on notice if we can have an update on whether there is a plan to review parking in Mount Hawthorne separately, or whether that is something that could be added to the place plan.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, I'll take that on notice.
Councillors. Councillor Konchevsky.
I'm just following up on Councillor Castle's questions in relation to what's a supporting document to what and what feeds into what in the document structure. So am I correct in saying that in previous iterations of place plans, a place plan has identified an action that has subsequently then been put forward through the budgeting process and inserted into the capital works programs, appreciating that not all have necessarily been covered off, and that's what you're referring to. But whereas it was the generation of the place plan that identified the projects and then they were scheduled into the CBP and budget. But you're saying now it's the recommendation of administration that the CBP and budgeting process is used to identify the projects that are then inserted into the place plans.
Through you, Mayor Cole, there's two different ways, I suppose, of the budgeting. So if it was an operational budget, it would be reflected in the place plan, and then we would go through that budgeting process for the annual budget. But for those larger scale things that are reflected in the capital works program, because that's a 4-year plan, we would see that being in the plan and captured in the place plan. I suppose overarchingly what we're trying to see is that the place plan reflects what is in that capital works program. But operationally, there are definitely projects within the place plan that we then ask for budget for when that budget review year comes up, because it's an operational budget line.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if I just might add, so this is a review of our existing place plans. And so that's really the reason why the capital works program is being prioritised in this instance. If we're developing a new place plan and consulting on a specific changes, then the roles would reverse and the place plan would lead the next review of the capital works program. And if that capital works program then didn't budget for it, we would go through this review process and update the place plan to take those things out. So council gets an opportunity to make the decision at 2 points in the process, when developing the plan and then again when adopting the budget.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. And yep.
Any questions? Councillor Iapolo?
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a quick question, more for my background. I can see with these place plans, the whole project is identification of an action and then the completion of that action. My question is, apart from that, is there any oversight in terms of KPIs or milestones or other measurements as to how the administration measures the return on investment in terms, because this is an annual program and we're talking about like 155,000 each year for the operating budgets and then the event sponsorship and then the actual grants, the 60,000 available to the town team. So apart from identifying an action and completion of that action, can we measure that ROI in any other way?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose, yes, there's lots of different ways of measuring things. A lot of the things that are outlined in the place plans are actions that are featured in other documents throughout the city. So whether it is the accessible city strategy, that's why you see the wayfinding plan in there, or kind of other actions. So I suppose those strategies and plans where that initial action was captured has those KPIs and those measures associated with them. So we would be measuring that specific action on those KPIs where that strategy or the objectives that that strategy has. But the overall program itself, we are actually, definitely prioritising looking at data collection and how we can measure performance in our town centres at the moment. And we're going through a project with that at the moment so that we can measure, I suppose, exactly that. Here is how the town centre is performing prior to the implementation of these actions. This action is then implemented. This is how the town centre is acting now, so that we actually have that data to back up. Well, this is the improvement that has been made so that we can show what actions are working, what actions are not working as well, and what we need to invest most of our time within.
So just to clarify then, this is something that is in progress and will be briefed as to what are you proposing to measure ROI sometime in the future?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose, yes, the individual action items and the measurement on those is already, but the overall measurement of our town centres, we have some things in place, but we're looking to build on that. And yes, we would report back on that.
Councillors, I just had 2 very quick questions, Manager. The first was in relation to the Vincent Place plan. It talks about it used to talk about prepare and implement town centre public space activation, and this has changed to promote. And my question is, do you feel that we're actually at a level of evolution where we can simply promote activation in our town centres, or are we still needing to really support and implement to make it happen?
To you, Mayor Cole, that's a good question. I think that the best use of our resources is that promotion and having the people who, I think Vincent is really lucky in the fact that we have those community groups and those people in our town centres that know how to activate really, really well. Not saying that the city doesn't, but we do have many groups that are very keen to activate. And I suppose that's why we are keen on focusing our efforts on that promotion through that event sponsorship and those town team grants that we've looked at, and promoting both the use of those grants as well as when they're taken up, the activations themselves, as we do have those people that are able to activate the town centres really well. And that, yes, I do believe that's the best use of our resources, and we have gotten to a point where that's very effective.
I'm just not sure we're there, but that's commentary. And also in relation to the Mount Hawthorne Place plan, it talked about discontinuance of the first phase of Axford Park upgrade. I thought that had been not discontinued, but deferred to later years.
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's been deferred to later years, and the reason it's discontinued is because it falls within a year that is not captured within the 4-year place plan.
Okay, so it's still in the place plan or not?
To you, Mayor Cole, not within the place plan, as the year that we are looking to deliver it is not within the years of the Mount Hawthorne place plan, which is up until 22-23. It is following this year.
Is there any way to capture it though? Because I think if a community member is looking, I'm happy for you to take that on notice. I think that might be easier.
We think it might be in the capital works budget, but we'll confirm that in the briefing note.
And also just in relation to the first question around moving from preparing and implement to promote, can you just perhaps in the briefing notes outline which community groups and town teams are actually in a position at this moment in time to be providing those events in and being able to run them successfully?
To you, Mayor Cole, yes, we'll provide that in the briefing notes.
Thank you. Any further questions on place plans? Okay, thanks all. Graham, I just noticed you're sitting over there and I thought this is getting very long. I assume you're here for item 6.3. Yes, I'll bring it forward so we can spare you any further. All right, so I'll move to the item 6.3, Hawthorne Hall Condition and Compliance Assessment. Any questions on this item? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Councillor Hallett.
Just, were we already aware of the presence of asbestos prior to this assessment?
Through you, McCall, yes, I believe we were. It's on our asbestos register. It's a small amount in the electrical infrastructure, I think, so we know about it and it's managed.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. Can you just confirm whether the initial works to make the building functional and serviceable do not trigger a requirement to comply with current standards?
Yeah, through you, McCall, no, they're minor and they don't.
And Director, just seeking some absolute clarity in relation to the $19,000 over the 4-year lease of the term. Is that something that the city is going, is it the recommendation from administration to do those works at one time, for example, in the next financial year, or how would you recommend that we address those issues?
Yeah, McCall, we have unallocated general budgets, if that makes sense, where we do these minor repairs and improvements. So the report talks about we can use that existing budget to do those works. We feel it's the beginning of a new lease. I believe the lease is now signed, if I'm correct. So if it is signed, we would, or nearly. So once that's confirmed, we would typically go ahead with these minor changes or improvements because there's a 4-year lease.
Yeah, I've just now read it in the finance section. Thank you very much for that. So in relation to the $195,000, that seems, for 20 years, that seems reasonable. What would the recommendation be about where that expenditure would fall?
I call that would be considered as part of the asset management strategy, where we talked about prioritizing buildings and activities and renewal, and also it'd be subject to sort of a life cycle cost assessment as well, whether it was worth doing those works. And we'd look at it as part of the whole of all our buildings, not as an individual, if that makes sense. So currently that is not allocated or planned.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Gontaszewski.
Recognising that it's not allocated or planned, but if the dot points that are there under the $195,000 bucket, I presume that there would be some that would need to be grouped together based on, or if there was going to have to be a grouping, one would assume that, say, removal of existing toilets and the new disabled compliant toilets would be work that you had to do together. And just whether there's any within that, if in the briefing notes I could get an understanding of any groupings of those tasks that would need to be done, so that one could get an understanding of perhaps a little bit more detail in the scheduling of potential works, even though I note that it's going to form part of that broader review.
Yes, I recall, I can check that. I mean, I think the feeling I got from the team is it would be done all at once, because doing those works are quite disruptive and one thing leads to another, as they always do. So that's my understanding, but I'll check and put some more information in the briefing notes.
Any further questions on Halverston Hall? Okay. Thanks, Graham. You're very welcome to stay if you're enjoying it. Okay, that takes us to item 5.6, final adoption of local government property local law 2021. Any questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm happy for this to be in the briefing notes. Can we get an understanding of what unisex toilet options we have in the city? Just had that question following the minor amendment to the gendered toilets in the local law. And secondly, again, happy for it to be taken on notice, if we could get an understanding of, in relation to verge treatments, what is the status of the following under the local law: synthetic grass and paved hard stand parking spaces, and whether they are considered verge treatments or are considered contrary to the local law, I suppose, and can be infringed.
So my call, I think those questions are mostly for me, so I'll take those on notice and put some information in the briefing notes.
Through Mayor Cole, just to clarify, Councillor Castle, you're asking just about specifically City of Vincent owned and managed public toilets?
Yes.
Any further questions? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Through you, just to go back to one of my favourite topics, the vaping. What was the basis for the inclusion of vaping and e-cigarette use within the definition of smoking? Are we kind of concerned about personal health risks or amenity impacts, smoking in public areas, secondhand smoke, all of the above?
Yes, sure, Mayor Cole, all of the above. But we can provide some more information in the briefing notes based on what's in the public health plan and the overall objective.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Councillors. Councillor Apollo.
Sorry, just a quick question. In relation to the changes that are proposed to the legislation, I just wanted to confirm whether administration has sought any legal advice so that the changes, there's no risk in terms of the changes being made. That's all, thanks.
Part of the process, through you, Mayor, part of the process is to consult with the Minister for Local Government. They raised a number of issues in respect to particularly the smoke-free areas. It's new ground, as I understand, in respect to the local law, and there's always a risk that that might be not supported by the Legislative Council Standing Committee on Delegated Legislation. So it is new ground and there is a risk involved.
So my question is more about the actual drafting of the changes. Like, has a lawyer affected the change? Or do we seek advice from a lawyer in relation to the intent of the changes we're trying to make?
My understanding, a lawyer did assist in the original drafting.
I'll just ask a follow-up question because we have had this local law disallowed. So it's a very good question to ask. And my understanding is that we have paid a considerable sum to have this reviewed by a legal firm. Is that correct, CEO?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, and specifically around that issue around the validity of the smoke-free town centres declarations.
I have two very quick questions. I just was thinking about the election signs permit, and I was thinking about the fact that we have polling booths in Vincent at some of our buildings like North Perth Town Centre, where we have state and federal elections and election signage everywhere. Where you've got those sort of conventions where, you know, that's a sort of polling day in the sense that local government doesn't have that day, will all political parties now have to come to the City of Vincent and seek permits? And is this something that only the City of Vincent does, or is this something that will mean that there's, you know, a bit of extra red tape in Vincent compared to, say, other local governments?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll take that on notice if I can. Thank you.
And the other question I had was around the beautification of verges. Some of those requirements have been in policy and they're moving into the local law. I noted, but not the street tree policy changes that were made around the allowance of cubbies and swings. So I just wondered why there is that differentiation, why the street tree policy changes that were made, which I would love to see as part of a local law, were not included, but the beautification of verge treatments were.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll take that on notice as well.
Any further questions? Okay. Next item is 5.7 Governance Framework Review 2021. Okay. 5.8 Policy Document Register and Review Plan, Progress Update and Implementation Review. Any questions, Councillor Hallett?
Just in relation to the public health plan, it's scheduled for review in October 2025. Is that when the review commences or is completed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, when it commences. So when the review is completed, the initial review, but before it and circulated to council members for comment, but before it comes to council for determination.
And just in relation to the increase in policies that have been reviewed in the last year compared to previous years, have additional resources been put into that, or is that pretty much just the outcome of having a plan to do so?
If through you, Mayor Cole, there's been no additional resources put into the implementation of this project as such. But what has happened is having the review document has held everyone accountable for undertaking the reviews they're responsible for. So hopefully that is clear, but yeah, no additional resources as such.
Councillors, I just had one question. Perhaps it was buried in there in the long list, but I couldn't spot education and care services policy for review. And I wondered whether that is becoming more important given the extent of childcare applications that we are seeing in the City of Vincent.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, my understanding is that review is currently being finalised and will be circulated in the policy paper, the next one that comes out in the next few weeks.
Fantastic, thank you. Any further questions on this one? Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Through you, so the public, I think I've raised this a couple of times before, the public open space strategy had a POS land acquisition strategy as one of the actions in there. I was just wondering if this policy document and review plan register will be an appropriate place to put development of that strategy onto.
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, this wouldn't be the appropriate place. This is for council policies as defined under the Local Government Act, as well as the local planning policies. So we'd have that as a separate document.
I'd just note that it does contain other strategies such as the POS strategy, sustainable environment, waste strategy, that kind of thing.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, if I could just add that we're very aware of what's outstanding in some of those older strategies. There'll be a report coming up to council on the POS strategy implementation, just like there has been on accessible cities. And the proposal is for the schedule for those reviews and the development of those documents, the development of those new documents is to be included in the CBP. As opposed to the policy review register, which we're trying to focus that on our existing documents and when they're scheduled for review, rather than the new ones we're developing.
Thank you. I know we're segueing here, but when is the public open space strategy review due?
Through you, Mayor Cole, it's currently being worked on. It's close to finalisation. I can't tell you the exact date, but this year? Oh, this month. There you go. Workshop this month.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara.
Any further questions? Okay. We do have a very late item. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to see it, but we have a 5.9 that has sprung up. Climate Emergency Australia Joint Statement, Australian Council's call for energy efficient and climate resilient homes via the National Construction Code. I'm not sure the councils have had an opportunity to read this. I was just having a quick look at it, but CEO, if you'd like to provide a bit of background, that would be helpful.
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, and with apologies for the short notice on this. It was just a very recent request through an organisation which we participate in, and Councillor Hallett is a member of, Climate Emergency Australia. They've essentially asked for the City of Vincent to join in a all of Australian local councils advocacy piece, and it is in complete alignment with what the City of Vincent has already endorsed in our sustainable environment strategy in terms of advocating for improvements in terms of the minimum standards on energy efficiency in the National Construction Code. So it's already consistent with what council's current policy position is, and we would support council adding the City of Vincent signature to this document.
CEO, can I just ask a question? Because this is very specifically asking for 7 stars and others rating. Would that align with our existing policy position?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, but we're required to implement the building code as adopted. So as it's state building ministers get together under a national framework and incrementally improve the standards for the entire country. So it's something we would be keen to see, and it's much more efficient for implementation if this is done at the building code level rather than through us trying to implement this through either local or state planning policy.
Yep, that's fantastic. I just wondered whether 7-star NATHERS rating would be something that we could get a view on in terms of that being implemented effective immediately and what implications that might have. This is some additional information in the report.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, a general comment and response is that as soon as a change to a whole of national standard takes place, then the entire industry has to essentially scale up to move its standards, and the fabrication and the products all suddenly hit a better price point for builders. And this would be much more efficient and effective to do at that national scale rather than individual local governments or even state governments trying to encourage or incentivize or promote those standards in the absence of having the national building industry all geared up for that higher level of minimum standard.
Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Ipolo?
do we know how many other local governments have already signed up to this? And does the administration feel the need to get any community engagement on whether we should do this?
Through Mayor Cole, the Council's Sustainable Environment Strategy does have an action for us to advocate for improvements to state and national standards on energy efficient buildings. So that Sustainable Environment Strategy was subject to community engagement and consultation, and we would see this being consistent with Council's already adopted policy. I might, if I can, just look towards Councillor Hallett, who might have be able to provide some advice on other local councils that might be supporting this, or are members of Climate Emergency Australia.
Sure, from memory, there's 104 councils that are members of Climate Emergency Australia. This communication only came out this morning, so we don't have a number of how many have actually signed up, but given that it's consistent with the intent of the membership more broadly of the organisation, I suspect it'll be most.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Moving to infrastructure and environment and item 6.1, review of memorials in parks and public reserves. Any questions on this item?
I just have one, and just I've raised this a few times. In terms of, there's a provision within this policy that essentially says if there's a disagreement between the applicant and the administration, that it will be referred to council for final approval. I guess my question is, if there was more clarity on policy within the policy, would that provide assistance to administration in terms of decision making under the policy? And the second thing is whether there's an awareness or an understanding of whether this model where council essentially acts as a I'm not sure.
Dispute resolution.
Thank you. There we go. Is noted formally in policy in other local governments.
So yeah, Mayor Cole. So the first thing to say is the policy currently says that everything has to come to council, and obviously longer standing council members will realise that some are relatively straightforward, but we've always had to come to council to get them approved. So the change is about administration being able to make the decision, provided and that there are some criteria to do that. And only if there's a disagreement would it then come to council. So yeah, I think to answer the first question, guidance from council is always good. It would help us make a decision. I'm not sure that we anticipate there will be major problems, because to this date there hasn't been, but guidance is always welcomed. Second question about the awareness and other councils, I'd need to take that one on notice, if that's okay.
I have a question. I'm just going back to the reason for deferral, which was to seek advice on whether there were any health or other issues with the odd scattering of ashes in city parks and reserves, but there's no information in the report on that.
Yeah, Michael, I'll check that. So since the item was deferred, it came to a council workshop. I think there was information in that workshop note. I'll check that, and we'll bolster up the report with that additional information.
Thank you. I don't recall that, but happy to have that included in the report. And can I also just flag, subject to seeing or rereading that information, can I just flag a potential amendment for preparation to retain the current policy provisions that allow for an application to the CEO for approval for the scattering of ashes at a time and manner of which is of minimal attention or disruption to the community. So just for new council members, that was the provision. It's proposed for that to be removed and to ban the scattering of ashes. And I guess I should ask one final question. Are there any issues at the moment? Like, are we actually seeing any problems in relation to scattering of ashes in the city of Vincent?
So Michael, the team cannot recollect. So the current requirement is to seek permission from the CEO, if I'm correct. The team can't recollect a time where we've ever been approached and asked for permission for ashes to be scattered. So in that sense, there is no problem, but there doesn't appear to be a demand either. So.
Okay. I'll just put that on the table for debate for next Tuesday. Any further questions on this policy? Okay. Item 6.2, asset management and sustainability strategy outcomes of advertising. Questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Thank you. Just two questions. One in relation to the sport and recreation facilities plan. Can we get some additional detailed information on this around objectives and timelines for the undertaking this important project? And then the second one relates to the short-term actions to develop an asset prioritisation for building, transport and recreation and parks, and to review, classify and allocate levels of service to all city buildings. Just get some additional information on the timelines for these two bodies of work.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I can answer the question on the sport and recreation facilities plan partially. That will be coming to council in the next calendar year, and we will that will be a main piece of work for the first half of next year, but we can provide more detailed kind of project milestones within the briefing notes.
Sorry, can I just ask one follow-up question just in relation to that? And the objective setting for that piece of work will be undertaken with council at what point? Or I know we've had some discussions about it, but the specific objectives, have they been finalised yet?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the plan is to discuss that project with council through a council workshop.
Through Mayor Cole, I think I can answer the second question. So the action about prioritising an asset prioritisation plan for different types of assets, and also the levels of services listed in the plan as being short term, which is 1 to 3 years.
So is the intention to commence either of those pieces of work within this financial year?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think commencement is one thing, but the whole thing being completed for the different assets is obviously hasn't been fully planned. So I couldn't say that it wouldn't be completed this financial year. I mean, that work is, some of that work already exists, so it would be continuing that work. So that's why, you know, we've got 1 to 3 years listed, because it's not specifically planned out as yet.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, should council endorse this asset management strategy, when will council be having the next conversation about these very important pieces of work? I appreciate we have had some ongoing discussion already, but when is the next time we're going to talk about this?
Okay, through you, Mayor Cole, if I take that on notice, I can speak to the team, talk about resources and come back with something a bit more accurate for next week.
Councillors, Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. Just a question in relation to the trends that were observed from the survey. I was quite surprised to see the comment most responders to the survey indicated that they never use playgrounds. But then the numbers say 35 out of 93. So I'm just looking for clarification about what that means. Is that only 35 people use playgrounds out of 93? First.
Mayor Cole, I believe that is the answer, that 35 people said they did and the rest didn't. Okay, so given, do we have any indication or any further information about the breakdown of the survey respondents? Given that we know our playgrounds are well used and we know the demographics of particularly certain areas of Vincent, I'm just trying to put some context around that comment as to, does that really tell us a different story, or is there another explanation?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I suppose we don't have that breakdown of what those respondents responded to in other areas in order to gain more of that information. I agree, it's different, I suppose, to what we felt our sentiment was. But Yeah, there's nothing more really that we can add to that rather than just the stats of what people have said. The only thing we could take from that is looking at like our comment on Braithwaite Park receiving the highest vote with outstanding value. So we could, I suppose, from a data perspective, look at the elements of that playground and kind of see that that's what the community most values, those elements. But that's probably all we could collate with the survey response that we've received regarding the playgrounds.
Okay. Do we know whether the respondents were mostly residents of Vincent or not? And Braithwaite Park is probably an example of a park that attracts users from a much wider area than just Vincent.
Through you, Mayor Cole, we can provide in the briefing notes that data.
Councillors, any further questions? Okay. Everyone's been fully briefed. Okay, our next item, we've then completed infrastructure and environment, so I'll move to community and business services. 7.1, tender for the supply and installation of gym equipment at Beatty Park Leisure Centre. Councillor Loden.
May I just have a couple of queries on the confidential section? So I was hoping it be raised at the end if possible.
Our CEO is keen to deal with it now because we have staff members here. Okay. Usually do confidential towards the end, but if that accommodates people being able to go home, that's not a problem. Wendy, are you happy to just pause the live stream? And just if I can explain to anyone watching, we just need to have some questions in relation to a confidential attachment for item 7.1. So we do just have to pause the live stream and then we will recommence the briefing. So it shouldn't take too long. Some questions on the confidential attachment to item 7.1, which is the tender for the supply and installation of gym equipment at Beatty Park. Are there any further questions in the open session not relevant to the confidential attachments? Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Item 7.2, authorisation of expenditure for the period 1st to 30th of September 21. Any questions? Director, just in relation to, I know I ask this a lot, but in relation to Devco, there's another significant payment of over $150,000, which just says maintenance. And I know that you're looking into how to categorise that expenditure better, but for the interim period, is there any way of breaking that down to at least by property or venue so that it's not appearing in such large general quantity?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I'll ask the officer who prepares that ledger if they can provide a little bit more detail based on what's on the invoice.
That'll be helpful in the interim. Thank you. Any other questions?
It's just a question, just for future. I was just wondering, I can see that when you're presenting these, it's sorted by the payee's name. I'm just wondering whether it's more appropriate or useful to sort by the cost from highest to lowest.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think we sorted it alphabetically at the request of a previous at a previous meeting, and it was to allow elected members to be able to compare lists from one month to the next month. It gave us a little bit. It's a bit easier to kind of do a compare and contrast. But I'm happy to take suggestions. We can do it either way.
If I just ask a follow-up question, if councillors are interested, could that table be provided? I assume it's an Excel spreadsheet, so could that actually be provided so then councillors could filter the spreadsheet? Is that possible?
So provided in a spreadsheet form?
Well, if it's available, I'm assuming that it's a spreadsheet that's been converted to PDF. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. So just in terms of our processes, it'll be an additional step to send it out to elected members manually. I'm happy to organise that if it's useful.
I guess it depends. I'm quite satisfied with how it is, but that remains an option. Might, just for consideration. Councillor Gonchevsky?
Oh, no, just that, yes, previously I think they were sent out in Excel, but it was challenging with the iPads to get them to work. But they were loaded to Docs on Tap in Excel. But if they could be sent via email with Excel, then councillors could open them on their desktops from their email browser. So that would be very useful. Thanks.
Through Mayor Cole, perhaps if I distribute it by Excel for the next 2 or 3 meetings, and then we can reassess and see if that's a useful process.
That sounds like a very good idea. Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Michael. Can I just ask a related question on that? I think we talked about moving to Microsoft Teams for the distribution of docs, and I note that you can share spreadsheets and things like that pretty easily through that. Have we made any progress on switching out of Docs on Tap?
Yes, through Merkel, we had converted all previous councillors to 365, and I just need to confirm that the 3 new councillors and their iPads are ready to go on that as well.
That's very good news. But in addition to that, can I also request that there's some training provided? I have very minimal knowledge of MS Teams. I do use it, but it's scary. But I'm very, I'd really love to see the change. That'd be great. Any other questions on expenditure? Okay. Item 7.3, financial statements as at 30th of September 21. Questions? Okay. 7.4, invest. Okay, go ahead.
7.3. Just the question is in relation to the Capex and funding summary on page 3, where it talks about the full year budget for Capex is 22.1 million, and in Q1 we spent 2 million of 22 million, which is considerably low for given that it's 25% of the year, but we're actually 1 million over budget already. So is it possible to get any further explanation on that item?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I can certainly get some more information on that, and I'll put in the briefing notes. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I had one other question, which is minor. Just on the Beatty Park finances on page 34, the health and fitness showed that the Q1 revenue figure was significantly over budget, but it doesn't look like the annual budget had actually been revised and reflected in the budget review. So I'm just wondering, does the budget actually get recalibrated every quarter, or is it just like, every 6 months, or just what's the process?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, the first quarter budget review that we're about to discuss will actually do that. And we do it one more time during the financial year, which is at the mid-year budget review. So there's 2 reset moments. Both of them come through council and are approved. And so after this council round, if the first quarter budget review is approved, then you'll see that those figures will be adjusted in terms of the budget reference points.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Right. Item 7.4, investment report as at 30th of September 21.
It's just minor. In the summary of key investment decisions, it talks about 3 transactions undertaken in September, but only 2 were listed. So I'm not sure if that's just a typo or something's been omitted.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I believe that there were 2 transactions that totaled one of those figures, but I can organise for that to be broken down for you.
Anything further? Okay. Item 7.5, first quarter budget review 21-22. Any questions? Councillor Gontaszewski.
Sorry, I just had to go back. I had just one follow-up question from our workshop on this item, and it just related to in the previous documentation provided, there was a reference to enterprise applications upgrade with a $221,000 additional allocation into this financial year. And I just wanted to get clarification as to what the total total spend in both 2021 and 21-22 on enterprise applications upgrade is. Just to, and I guess also if there's any variance to what we had sort of discussed previously in relation to that and what is being delivered for that. I'm aware that there's a number of applications, authority and so on are being updated. So
through Mayor Cole, I'll provide a bit of a summary of what we've spent in terms of enterprise management applications last financial year and then intended for this financial year. Is that the, does that respond to the question?
Yeah, it does. I guess specifically just to get clarification around this $221,000 figure as to confirm that that is that was essentially a carry forward that wasn't able to be recorded as such.
Yes, that's right.
Councillors? Oh, okay, go ahead.
Sorry, Councillor. Just also just in relation to the, I note that there's the $375,000 for the Norfolk Street North-South Stage 1 that has been removed, and the but there is still $50,000 in the budget corrections for designing the bike network plan. I just wanted to check in relation to this, the detailed design for the Norfolk Street and get confirmation on the, I think it was the Glendalough bike lanes that were also being designed this year. Are those two projects still occurring?
So through Mayor Cole, just to confirm, the two things we're checking on is the Norfolk Street design, make sure that's included, and then the bike planning for Glendalough.
Yeah, I think it was design. My understanding is that we were doing design for both Glendalough and Norfolk Street this financial year. And just to get some clarification, because I note that there was funds for Norfolk Street design and deliver that was incorrectly allocated to this financial year when the intention should have been just to design. Just want to confirm that there is funds allocated for design and that also funds haven't been reallocated from the Glendalough design. So that so I can confirm that the three bike network related activities we're doing this year is reviewing the bike plan, designing Norfolk Street and designing Glendalough. That's my understanding. And if I could just get clarification that that's the case.
Thanks. I'll take that on notice. Thanks, Mayor Cole.
Councillor Apollo.
Thank you. I just got a question about the opening surplus, because I think that the opening surplus is obviously an important number because it's the starting point for when we actually calculate the amount we're trying to recover from rates after we've done all our budget. So I note the opening surplus as at 1 July 21 increased by $1 million, resulting in an overall budget surplus of 500,000. I'm just trying to understand whether this number includes any favourable variance from Capex from prior years. So to the extent that we didn't spend our entire budget on Capex, actual versus budget, does that favourable variance for monies not spent, is that included in the opening surplus?
Through Mayor Cole, I'll take that one on notice. I haven't seen the detail of the breakdown since it was adjusted. It's going through the auditors at the moment. So let me do the detail and I'll come back to you on that.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor Loden.
Just a query on the Glendalough bike lane as well. Is that impacted by potential changes to the intersection of Main Street? I understand there's some barriers around that project proposed at the corner of Main Street and Scarborough Beach Road.
Yeah, well, I think Mayor Cole will take that one on notice as well. Thanks.
You want to ask another question? Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, there were attachments to this, and I can't. That disappeared. It might be user error, but I remember when I was looking at it before on one of the attachment 5 on the last page, page 16, there was an item enterprise software.
Yes.
And that enterprise software upgrade increased from 238,000 to 452,000, but there was no explanatory comment or justification for that 200,000 plus increase.
Yes.
If we could have
any Yeah, I think, Mayor Cole, I think that was a similar question to Councillor Gontichevsky. No, that's fine. So I'll
Flicking through.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's
Sorry.
no, that's all good. So the enterprise applications will provide a little bit of detail in terms of what we spent last year, what's been carried forward, and what we're intending to spend this year.
Thank you.
Director, this is just a very straightforward question, which I think I already know the answer to, but I just wanted to clarify with the grant money received. So we've got, for example, North Perth Bowling Club and Margaret Kindergarten.
Yep.
I had thought that we had included that already in the budget, but is this saying that we hadn't included that because the grant money hadn't been received and now it has?
That's my understanding, Mayor Cole, is that we've got the grant money, but we didn't have the corresponding capital expenditure. And so this now adjusts that to reflect that change.
Okay, thank you. And just in relation to the electrical infrastructure renewal at 300,000, where it says reallocation to fund urgent electrical work safety priority, is that's not Beatty Park, that's something separate?
It is, yeah, it is Beatty Park, Mayor Cole. So it relates to the electrical works in the grandstand. That is part of that broader Beatty Park project.
Okay, I also thought that we had already allocated that funding for the annual budget.
There is that broader Beatty Park project, and there was finances provided within that project scope for that piece of work. And we will be bringing a report to the December meeting to break down the status of the Beatty Park project and the funding that's been provided and the amount of money that's left over. The request that I received through administration was that we ensure that we do have a clear provision set aside at this first quarter budget review to ensure the timely completion of those works while the remaining project is actually being reconciled, and that we can bring the project status report back in December.
Okay, but then should that first column current budget be presented as a dash? Because my understanding is that that was already allocated. So I think that needs to be reflected as what was allocated and that this is additional.
I think this, the reason that I have that as a dash on page 2 of the report is that the Beatty Park capital works is actually shown elsewhere in the broader capital schedule. So this is just, that table is reflecting movements in and out according to a particular number that I'm tallying up to. So it's reflecting the fact that, yeah, so the overall capital works for the Beatty Park project are shown in the capital works schedule in more detail, but this is just reflecting changes.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand. So the original scope of works had included the electrical infrastructure renewal as part of the budget set by council. The way I read this is that this is additional $300,000. It's not a movement from Beatty Park into something else. So I just don't think that that's clear to council or community that that's actually an additional $300,000 towards the Beatty Park project.
So Mayor Cole, if I can point elected members to on attachment 5, which schedules the detail for the capital budget. On the first page under Beatty Park Leisure Centre, it has 4 line items, and it actually indicates what the carry forward figures are for the Beatty Park project for 21-22. And so it does show that there is amounts there for the facilities infrastructure renewal, concourse tiling, and repair and maintenance of the grandstand.
Sorry, Director, which page number is that? Because attachment 5 is quite long.
It's actually on the front page of attachment 5.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just get it up in front of me as well. So we have, the title is Land and Building Assets, and then there's one item for Admin Centre, and then the next item on that page is Beatty Park Leisure Centre. And then there are 4 transactions underneath that schedule.
So we are agreeing to these project scope changes through quarter 1 budget review rather than through a revised project plan coming to council.
This is the request that I've been asked to put forward. The suggestion has been that the detailed project reconciliation is brought to council's review in December, and that if there is any adjusting items required based on what we sign off today, then that will be reconciled back at that point in time.
I had understood that any significant change to the scope in terms of the funding allocation that we would that we would concurrently receive a revised Beatty Park project scope change report, because if I'm understanding this correctly, there are 3 amounts here, which is tiny in print here. I'm trying to read it. Something like 455,000. 65,000 and 300,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that schedule is showing that we originally had a carry forward figure of 1.5 million and we reduced it down to 1 million. So there was a downward variance of 465,000. So what that's reflecting is that we originally expected that we would be carrying forward 1.5, but when we did our reconciliation at 30th of June, we only needed to carry forward $1 million on that particular part of the project. So on that particular item, management is saying that the 465,000 was expended last year and is not required in this year.
Michael, if I add something about the infrastructure, what infrastructure we're trying to do. I think one of the issues was that there is that budget line called facilities infrastructure renewal, for which a number of items, tiling, filtration, there's a number of items. And so what we're seeking to do is create a separate budget line and be very clear about what that's for, because there's some confusion about the other one, if you know what I mean. But you are correct. We're suggesting that we take underspend or money that's not needed from other projects to create the 300,000 budget, which will then allow us time to sort out the facilities infrastructure renewal budget, which is that top line you see, which is that will be the subject of a December council report. So you are correct. At the moment, that is money sourced from other locations to create a separate budget line to do the electrical works. But there will be a report coming and there will be surplus left over in the facilities infrastructure. We just need more time to sort that out, and that's scheduled to come to December with the necessary documentation to make those changes.
Oh, no. So, Mayor Cole, just to, if I understand your question, this request is that there is an additional $300,000 being asked to be added to the Beatty Park project, in addition to what council has previously approved. And the scope of works is the same, so there's no increase to the scope of works. So it's just it is an increase of 300,000 to the project.
Okay. I don't think your microphone's working now. There you go.
Maybe I just need to turn it on. So it's actually additional 230,000, because you see 70,000 comes from the infrastructure renewal budget. So it's actually at the moment it's additional 230,000 that's sourced from those other two projects where there are underspends.
Underspends within the Beatty Park project.
No, and underspends in other projects.
Okay, well, that to me is the same, because that's just taking funding from underspends and putting it into the project, which is becoming much more expensive than initially scoped. So I just
So these changes don't increase the total capital works because the team are redistributing the funds. but-
Totally clear on that.
Yeah, and the overall BD Park project is requesting an additional $300,000.
Yep, now I'm clear. Okay, thank you. Could we have some more explanation in the report for Tuesday, please? Thank you. Any further questions on Q1? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move to CEO items. Item 8.1, underground power update. Questions? Councillor Loden?
The report refers to approximately 85% of properties still not having underground power. And I was wondering, for those 15%, are they just the ones that are located in the zones where we've specifically undergrounded power that we're aware of? Or does that include properties that they've undergrounded their power, but not by putting the poles and wires underground? It's that they've run a line underneath the road because they're on the opposite side of the street to what the power lines go down, which is, I think, is a requirement whenever you demolish a property, you then have to, and you're on that opposite side of the street, you have to put your power underground.
Through you, Mayor Cole, that is an estimate, and part of the consultant's report suggests that we do spend some time and money doing a reconciliation on the mapping of which properties do and don't have underground power already, and that would require reconciliation with Western Power data as well.
So the next stage, we'll consider those and then figure out how to appropriately charge people or not, if that's the case. The other one is the report comments around a levy service charge being the most equitable way of charging the rates. And I was just curious about that. If you were in a $2 million house or a $500,000 house, you would pay the same charge to get your power undergrounded. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I think the service charge can change depending on the property, but we're working on averages here. So for the purposes of modelling and putting this to council for a high level consideration, we would be working on average per property for that connection.
So when the service charge is charged, it would be differentiated between properties then? Or that is still to be determined?
Through you, Mayor Cole, this would need to be mapped out in some extensive detail by Western Power to determine each property's needs and connection requirements, because there can be complications on the site.
So it might be more a function of the complexity of the site rather than it being just each site is the same price. And then we would need to consider how we manage that so that one person isn't paying 20 grand to get their site connected and the guy next door is paying 1,000.
Through you, Mayor Cole, most local governments do essentially set a per property price and absorb some variations along the street.
And given the differential in prices between a $2 million house and a $500,000 house, is GRV through rates an appropriate potential way to provide an equitable way of raising the necessary funds?
Through Mayor Cole, it would be up to council to determine what they're most comfortable with in terms of financing options and that consideration around equity amongst property owners.
But that option would be part of the things that the options that is presented to council when this comes back. So it's not, this is because the consultant's report specifically talks to the recommendation of sort of charge per household, but we're not at this point making that decision, when we will consider options like a rate in the dollar charge across residents. Sorry, is that correct?
Through Mayor Cole, part of the intent of this report was to be able to get some high level feedback from council on and provide some direction on where, if we do some further work, where we should focus our efforts in terms of funding options. So we're very keen to understand where council may be at on a new program in general and some direction on implementation in practice.
Councillor Gonchevsky.
Thank you. Just looking at the wording of the recommendation, I note that it talks to requesting administration to seek feedback on underground power options from the community panel. I guess similar to the asset management question I had, is that if the recommendation is endorsed as is, there's no direction to administration as to the priority that council would place on these works and when we would expect to see that information come back. Now we're in the briefing notes and be able to get some consideration in terms of resourcing and perhaps a little bit more information on next steps that need to be undertaken, so that with a view to potentially crafting a fifth point around a further report to council and the timelines where that would be appropriate.
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we'd be very happy to do that. And again, we were trying to get a steer from council on how much more additional work in this direction we should be doing. The community panel process in recommendation 4 would be essentially seeking to replicate the process we went through on the asset management strategy with the panel that's convened. Our experience was that was very useful and provided a good level of independent and objective feedback from the community. And we think this subject matter could equally be applied to a community panel process. When we first commissioned the consultants, we thought there might have been some urgency about when Western Power may announce its next program following the SUP. My current understanding is that it's not imminent in the next few months. We probably would have a little bit more time to play with, but if council wanted us to undertake that consultation with the community panel, we could do that within this financial year. So it would allow council to decide whether or not any provision should be made as part of the annual budget process going into the middle of next year.
Could I ask a follow-up question? I'm not entirely sure what we would be asking the community panel at this stage. There's so many assumptions, including sale of assets at $20 million. Which assets would we do that? Would we invest it in underground power? And I guess my question is, at the end of the report, it says that council, if the council decides to proceed, that administration would prepare a business case with options and more detailed advice on resourcing implications. And my question is, would that not be the next more appropriate step, so that when we go to the community panel and the community, we're very clear about what we're asking them to comment on? Because the number one question, I'm trying to ask a question, isn't the number one question about underground power usually going to go to what will the cost be? What will the cost be to the city? Whether that's through sale of assets, whether that's through loan repayments, over what period of time, and what would be the cost to the residents. So my question is, would we be better off swapping out that clause to talk about more of a sort of options paper with more detailed information for council? And also a simpler question is that in relation to the clause around creating an underground power reserve, I understood we already have one.
Through Mayor Cole, part of this recommendation would be that we put some substantial money aside, or generate substantial money, or have a plan to be able to fund an underground power program.
Okay, well, just in relation to the existing underground power reserve, which only has about $200,000 in it, is there any reason why we can't simply use that reserve? Is the criteria, you know, is the criteria that is different to what we'd have to do? Or I just don't understand why we need to establish a new reserve if we already have one. And if it's about the money, then obviously that has to flow into it, and that hasn't happened yet. So that just a question on that, and just a question on why we wouldn't consider doing the business case options prior to engagement with the community panel, in summary.
Through Mayor Cole, that would be up to council. The high level options are contained in the consultant's report. There are not really any other options that weren't considered by the consultants. We'd be looking for a steer from council on what the preference would be on funding. To summarise the proposition, we would be suggesting that the beneficiary pays, which is the property owner, assuming 70% of property owners pay the service charge up front. There would be some property owners that may be seeking to be able to repay that service charge over something like 5, 7 or 10 years. And essentially all the city would need to do is have somewhere between $2 and $4 million in the bank to be able to fund those terms for property owners who didn't pay that service charge up front. So we're not talking about anything which is unachievable, but it would involve either a rates increase to generate that money to put it into a reserve to be that rolling fund, or the option in the report also mentioned a potential asset sale, and Councillor Erdens asked us about debt funding that rolling reserve as well.
I think my question is, could we not then receive some more detailed financial scenarios? Because we need to understand borrowing limits, ability to repay loans, what assets we're talking about, what would actually be prepared to sell to put towards this. And if we're talking about rate increases, we're also talking about doing that to meet the asset sustainability question. So my question is, are we actually ready to go to a community panel without having a more detailed analysis of what we can actually put to a community panel as affordable options?
Through Mayor Cole, I don't think we'd want to put anything more detailed than the high level options that the report suggests, because any more detailed report would be getting down to what specific property owners might be paying.
I guess I would at least want to know, if we're talking about going to a community panel and saying we're going to sell $20 million worth of assets, what are we actually speaking of? It's not. Anyway, that's getting into debate, but I'll move on. Councillor Apollo.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think that the question is both the recommendations 3 and 4, you would think we're not in a position to actually do those, because you would think that the logical time to do that is after the CEO's engaged with Western Power on the options. And in terms of the reserve from an accounting perspective, I mean, unless you have some information, then it would probably be inappropriate to try and quantify what an appropriate reserve would be without that information. Sorry? Then my question is, can the administration please consider whether recommendations 3 and 4 should be deferred?
You're learning the art of the council briefing. It does take a bit of adjustment. Doing well.
I did have one other question. It was about the consultant's report. They made a comment in section 10.1 about the problems caused by solar. And then they made another remark in section 10.4 in relation to the fact that nearly 23% of Vincent dwellings have solar, but they don't tie the two. So I'm asking if we could get clarification from the consultant about what the impact on a high take-up of solar would be on a possible implementation of an underground power program.
Through you, Mayor Cole, thanks, Councillor Apollo. That's a good point. Some of that information related to section 10, solar and battery uptake by households, that was provided directly by the city to the consultant. So that's our in-house information about our understanding of the solar uptake in the community. The bottom line is that regardless of, even if there was a massive uptick in solar, even with a massive lowering in cost of household batteries, it would still be a requirement for nearly all households to be connected to the grid unless there was an exceptional circumstance.
I guess just to rephrase the question is, when we look at the options, it would be good to have a further understanding as to what a high take-up of solar power would be, whether that's likely to incur additional costs for residents who have solar if we proceeded to underground power. It's just about what the impact of this program would be for local governments that have a high solar uptake, given that they've raised that point in the report.
Through you, Mayor Cole, part of Council's request was to provide some commentary around technology, solar and battery uptake, rather than the consultants providing that. The two are essentially distinct and separate. Households or property owners are choosing solar on their own cost benefit. It doesn't negate the requirement for them to still have a good connection, because there'll be a time when the solar won't be able to recharge the batteries for a particular point in time, and for emergency purposes, all households will still need to be connected to the grid, and whether the powers are overhead or underground, that wouldn't impact what households are doing on their own cost benefit analysis.
Any further questions on underground power? Okay. Item 8.2, Sustainable Environment Strategy 19 to 24 Progress Update. Any questions? Councillor Loden?
Just on the last comment at the end there, it talks about the contract being signed for our renewable energy supply from 3 wind turbines. I just wanted to check. My understanding is that we've signed this, but there's a certain number of other local governments that need to sign it. And so is that contract now effectively unconditional? Have we had enough people sign up?
Through you, Mayor Cole, the city has till I think the end of this month. I'll just have to double check that, to the end of November, to indicate its willingness to participate and the terms in which aspects that we would participate in. My understanding is that the indications from councils are that it will be oversubscribed in terms of the numbers, so it is a live and feasible project.
Any further questions?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
And then there's this opportunity to include the some of the other sites and the non-contestable sites. So we'd basically be 100% renewable energy by 2025 potentially.
Through you, Mayor Cole, if we're able to access those additional non-contestable sites. So the progress looks good. And so this would be a massive bring forward of what we were planning in terms of our renewable targets on electricity.
And then just on FOGO, so now with the rollout happening, we will see roughly a 90% reduction in our waste emissions. But my understanding is that there will be some kind of carbon abatement potentially created from that. And do we know if those credits come back to us as the city, or if they will be held by the waste provider?
Yes, you might call. I just need to check those figures, 90%. We do have a conversation about FOGO, Councillor Loden and I, so I'll have a chat with him and see what I can do about getting those answers before next week.
Any other questions? Okay. 8.3, council briefing and ordinary meeting of council dates for 2021. Just noting the first council meeting's been brought forward by a week. Any questions? Thank you, administration, for that. 8.4, appointment of council members to Chief Executive Officer Performance Review Panel. Any questions about this or how the panel works? Okay. 8.5, appointment of council members to the Metro West Joint Development Assessment Panel. Any questions about the JDAP or how it works? Councillor Wallace.
Thanks, Miko. I just wanted to point out an error in the item that has yourself down as Councillor Toppelberg's alternate, when I'm in fact Councillor Toppelberg's alternate at the moment.
Oh, didn't even pick that up. Thank you.
Through Mayor Cole, will correct that for the OCM.
Probably historic.
Yeah, the previous, might have been 2 years ago. And just to highlight the any new members would be required to do training with the Department of Planning.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Given that one of the members, current members to the period 27 January 2022 is Councillor Toppelberg, who's no longer a councillor, does the wording need to be altered because the new member would need to be appointed from now?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'll double check this, but the appointments weren't going to commence until January because of that point I made about all new members needing to undertake the mandatory training with the department. So the departments has given us additional time.
So the alternate just covers in the meantime? Yeah, okay.
And this doesn't in any way replace the fact that we already have 3 council members who have been appointed. This is only effective as of the 27th of January. Yep. Okay. Okay. Um, 8.6, appointment of council members and community members to the City of Vincent Audit Committee and amendment of terms of reference. Can I just ask a question about when we're actually getting the community members information through? And just in general for this as well as all of the groups.
To you, Mayor, I expect that will be out by Friday. Both the list of nominations and the recommendations for community member appointments.
If it could be any earlier, if it's available, I think that would be appreciated given that the meeting's on Tuesday. And also wondered, is administration actually going to do a ranking process and make recommendations as part of that?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, we're oversubscribed for the numbers of positions on the advisory groups.
I think previously we might have just had a long list. I think it really does help, particularly if we've got shortened time period to consider. If there's actually a sort of recommendation based on experience, etc., that would be helpful. Thank you. Any questions on audit committee? Okay. And 8.7, appointment of council members and community representatives to advisory groups. Any questions about any of the advisory groups? No, I'm going over to Councillor Loden. He looks more sure. He's got his hand up more forcefully.
It's all about being assertive, Councillor Hallett. For the wrap, I'm wondering how we would go about having a non-council member as the chair of that, if we were to appoint at our first meeting one of the ATSI members to be the chair, and that we basically allocate a council member as a deputy chair as a backup to that person. Is that possible under the current terms of reference? And if not, can I request an amendment to facilitate that?
Through you, Mayor, the current policy for advisory committees provides that the advisory group chairman is to be appointed by council, and then it goes into that preferably the advisory group should be chaired by a council member, if possible, or by then by a senior city officer. So to accommodate that, we'd need to amend that policy to reflect the ability to for the RAP to appoint its own chairperson.
Based on what you've said there, is it possible for at the first RAP meeting the RAP working group to put forward somebody as the chair and then that get ratified at the next council meeting, given it's just a preference that it's a council member or a senior staff member, but we could choose to not follow that preference?
Through the chair, probably the best means would be to appoint an interim chairperson so the meeting can actually commence and then go through that process.
I think it's fantastic. So if we can just get some advice on how to make that happen so we can consider it at the next meeting, that would be great.
My other query was just around for the nominees in the, obviously we don't have the list of names, but what would be good is to understand which of those people are of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander descent as well, recognising that we've had requests that the the RAP effectively be solely Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from our community and council and members and council staff. So as a consideration too.
Any further questions? Okay. Last item for the evening. Oh no, sorry, there's two more. 8.8 information bulletin. Any questions? Last item for the evening, 11.1. This is a, sorry, is this wholly confidential? I thought that the front part of the report was not confidential. It's a wholly confidential item. Sorry, I missed that. Why is that? I can understand the attachments, but I'm not sure why the report is confidential.
The attachment should be the only confidential item. The report itself is should be open to the public.
Can I just check that it is, because Docs on Tap isn't working for now, I'm going off the internet. Is it, has it been included wholly as a confidential item? It has, okay. Perhaps that could be treated the same as the others unless there's a reason for it, yep, to be confidential. So that is a confidential item at the moment, but do we have to treat it as such? No. Are there any questions, not on the confidential attachments where there's personal information about the candidates, but are there any questions on the report itself on Leederville Gardens? No, that makes it easy. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Congratulations, new councillors. You have officially made it through your first briefing. Well done. And I will thank everyone for your attendance and declare the meeting closed at, use my phone, 8:56 p.m. Thank you.